Well, welcome to the Time for Truth broadcast with me, your host, Pastor Ray Barnett. As you know, or perhaps you don't know, this is your first time watching, this particular aspect of the ministry here is, as I have put it, a pilot program. I'm trying to see how many people are interested in the subject of anxiety and depression. I know the need is great, so that's a given, but I'm willing to invest my time right now I've been coming to my office. I may not always do that, but so far since Monday, today is Thursday, April 16th? So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then there's today. I've started this pilot program on the subject of anxiety and depression. You have to realize if you have watched the videos and you're starting to follow them kind of in sequence, that broadcasts like this, now we've been on radio for 33 years, and the audience is always changing all the time. In fact, in radio, I forget how many stations we're on right now, but it's a few of them. And I'm on all over the place. The broadcast goes on at all times, different times, in different states. And at one point, we just recently had to release a few stations. We were broadcasting through most of North Africa and out of Bethlehem in Israel. But right now, we're just here in the United States in the northeast corner. And this is my territory, where I've been brought to be a pastor in upstate New York. Anyway, the audience is always changing, and so some things that I'll say at the beginning, maybe even during a broadcast, is maybe repetitious for you, but for somebody else it's going to be the first time they're hearing it. So I just wanted to explain that. Again, the subject is anxiety and depression. As I have already explained, my first doctorate, my first PhD, which is in biblical studies, not psychology, but it was on the subject of anxiety, depression, the Bible, and mental health. So my PhD is in biblical studies, not psychology, but my topic was what would be considered, a student in psychology would do, except I wasn't looking to prove anything except the authority of the Bible on not only this subject, but any subject, but I concentrated obviously on anxiety and depression. The lessons that you're going to get here on this broadcast comes from a class that I had, I don't know how many years ago it is now, probably about 10, maybe a little bit more, where I taught. We had a steady dozen students. We had other people coming and going who had problems with anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and so on, mental health disorders. But it was only those 12 that stayed faithful and came and worked it out, week by week. We met every Saturday. Had great results, as I've told you on these earlier broadcasts this week. Really great results, beyond what I expected. So I wanted to bring them to you. As you can see, the format here is very casual. I have my Cortland, my SUNY Cortland t-shirt on, and I even have the jacket to match. No, I did not graduate from Cortland, but my daughter did. And this is what I got as a result. Now, some of my friends did. Jeannie and Rich, if you're out there watching, you graduated from Cortland, SUNY Cortland, and others that I know as well. Cortland is only about 2 hours from here. So as you can see, the approach is a casual one. I'm in my office. Perhaps I'll be here every time I do the broadcast. But it's as if we're just sitting down and talking. The disadvantage is obvious. It's monologue. I can't ask you a question. You can't ask me a question, except that you put something in the comments. So if you have a question as these broadcasts go along, you put them in the comments. Now I've asked you, if you're showing interest in the subject, to subscribe to this channel, Pastor Ray Barnett. You're going to recognize my profile picture with the beard. Very easy to find. The other channel, which belongs to our church as well, is the Time for Truth Ministries. That's where you'll see my sermons, my messages, Bible studies, Bible teachings. There's a bunch of them up there already. And you can subscribe to that channel too. And again, they're easy to find. You'll see my face. I don't know if that's a pleasant thing or not, but that's what's going to happen. You're going to see my face. And there's not too many of us out there who look very, very close to Santa Claus. Easy to find. This channel, which is again the more casual one, when the church comes back after we're released out of prison here, there's a different feel when I'm talking to people who are actually there. But right now I'm talking to cameras all the time. In this particular instance, on this channel, Pastor Ray Barnett, it would just be this format right here. There'll be nobody but you and I. And I ask you to subscribe. I ask you to hit the notification bell button so that you know when I've uploaded a video. I don't know that I'm going to ever go live, because things can always go wrong when you're going live. With video, you have a second and third chance if something goes wrong. But that's what I'm requesting. See, this is going to be able to give me the feel for whether me investing time with you on this subject is worthy of my time. I got a lot of things to do, a lot of things more to accomplish before I leave this earth, which I hope is later rather than sooner, but one never knows. So I have spent 43 years in ministry. I have extensive background in dealing with this particular subject. As I said, I earned my very first PhD, and I have more than one, in the subject of the Bible and mental health, or our program here, God's Answers for Anxiety and Depression, and I should add on mental health issues. So subscribe please to the channel if you're interested. You could always unsubscribe, right? Hit the notification button. That'll let you know when I've uploaded a message or teaching, and that'll give me a feel for where this is going to go. But I have to say though, this is again Thursday, the very first week that I launched this program, and the response so far has been pretty good. So I'm encouraged by that. If you encourage me to stay on the air by subscribing and hitting the notification button, then I'll continue to do these teachings, and we could be here for a long time talking about the things that trouble you, specifically anxiety, depression, and mental health. But you know what? The Bible is much broader than that. It deals with human problems, human nature, the things that we deal with, starting with the worst case scenario, death, and back and forth. There's so much to offer you, and I have a lifetime of experience. As a matter of fact, my philosophy at this stage of my life, I'm not going to tell you exactly how old I am, but I think if you look at the beard, you could probably guess. But I'm starting to get up there. And my view on ministry is that it's taken me this long just to figure out what I'm doing. And I'm more value to people now than I've ever been in my entire life in ministry, because I have a lot of experience. I've dedicated my life almost singularly to one subject, the study of the Bible. And so, with that said, last night in our Bible study, which again you can find on, we have two channels, Time for Truth Ministries, this channel that you're watching now, Pastor Ray Barnett. They're both right now running concurrent on this subject because I figured it was a timely subject for so many people who are dealing with anxiety and depression that maybe never did before, simply because we've been shut in, and you can't turn on the news, but it's always something distressing. The times we live in are difficult, there's no doubt about that. And so last night in the Bible study, which is Wednesdays at 7:30, I began to teach on these principles that we're going to start today. My experience, for those of you watching the first time, is that I'm not only experienced in almost a half a century in studying the Bible diligently, but I'm also an experienced sufferer from anxiety and depression. And that's why I told you on Tuesday's broadcast, that was the 14th of April, and then Wednesday, yesterday's broadcast, I finished it off with that plot twist. These things happen in life. So you really should watch those to get more extensive knowledge of how am I qualified to talk about this subject. You understand that most pastors, even when they do address the subject of worry and anxiety and depression, they don't go into much depth because they don't have much knowledge of the subject. I gained the knowledge of the subject simply from studying it, but I did it for myself, which then in time just came out in messages, and then this class that I started a while back, for which we had tremendous success, better than I expected. So we'll start today, if you'll subscribe and hit the notification button. But right now it's looking pretty good that we're going to build up an audience that's interested in, I want to say getting rid of, and Christ certainly is a healer. He is the healer. But at least palliating your symptoms and getting them to be diminished. So for instance, if you're watching right now and you have agoraphobia, and you've been shut in, as I met a woman one time who was shut in her house for decades. I forget exactly how many years it was. She'd only go from her house to the mailbox and back in again. That was it. Before her mental health disorder kicked in, she was very active, average person, going to the stores, going to the mall, whatever. But once that occurred, once that happened, she didn't leave her house for decades until she began to get some aid and some help. But that's what I'm here to help you to do. If you're, like I said, if you're shut in, perhaps you're watching from a prison cell or a hospital room. The audience in television, which we've done for a number of years, and radio too, has a great way of reaching people that ordinarily a person like myself as a pastor could not reach, but I can through these venues that the technology that God has provided for us. So we'll start today. I will, by the way, try to keep these broadcasts, now that I've told you my story, and the first one was a big introduction, to about 30 to 40 minutes. Now if I run longer, I run longer. You can always stop the tape, come back to it later, not a big deal. But I won't cut it short if I'm in the middle of something very important, for your benefit. But I won't make them, as we have a saying in preaching, I'm not going to make my sermons immortal by making them everlasting. But sometimes there's important things to say, you can't cut them out. All right, these principles that I bring to you are all biblical principles, all verses found in the Bible. Today we're just going to deal with principle number 1, which I dealt with last night at the Bible study, if you were with me and if you saw it. And it sets the foundation for healing and help in anxiety, panic attacks, depression, even the mental health, bipolar, schizophrenia. That was my story. My experience wasn't pleasant. The foundation is really in this one statement: I must never permit myself. This is principle number one, which, by the way, you can download these 12 principles off of our website, which is timefortruth.com, F-O-R, timefortruth.com. So that if you become a regular here, and it's really like an online course. You can download these principles off the website, and you could have them with you when I'm teaching, and then you could read them during the week and so forth, refer to them. But the first principle and the foundation is that I must never permit myself to doubt the love of God. Now, as I said last night, this is easier said than it is done. Always keep in mind that there's a difference between simple and easy. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, you wanted to build up muscle mass, and you're not going to take steroids, you're not going to take drugs. You're going to do it, well, in my opinion, the way it should be done, naturally. And I wish, because I do a lot of training in the gym as well, because I've done that longer than I've done anything else. And a lot of young men, hey, I want to be big, and I want to be strong. And I said, well, all right, and we map out a kind of a program. But I always tell them you have to be patient, because building muscle mass the correct way, God's way, the natural way, takes years. That's being here every day, dedicated, lifting, hard, putting in a lot of time and work, and then rest, and then eating, in that order. God's principles are often the same way, very frequently the same way. If you notice in God's nature, He doesn't grow a tree overnight. Things take time, God's time. Well, when you're in great distress, or you are greatly stressed, then you're going to want to be healed immediately, as we all do. That's just in our nature. I mean, when you're in a lot of pain, you want relief now. Now, we can do that, or medical science can do that. Your doctor perhaps can do that, and that's perhaps. They can do that with pain medications or something like that. Maybe even a surgery. Not so much when it comes to the area of the mind. As the mind is programmed, and/or there's a reciprocal relationship between, let me just say the brain, between the brain as the center and the central nervous system, and bringing it back over to the other realm of the mind. There's a difference, right, between the brain and the soul. And they have this back and forth relationship. You can have a symptom that starts first, registers in the brain as a danger, when it's not really a danger, and it sets off a panic, fear, anxiety, depression too. And then, that signal goes back down the brain to your body and confirms it when it's actually not true. That's important, it's not true. And then the body becomes even more tense, more upset, and so forth, and then sends another signal back to the brain, which says, yeah, this really, really is bad, isn't it? And the brain says, yeah, and it's getting worse. And then your nervous system, from all parts of the body or any part of the body, is saying, yeah, it's really, really bad. So now there's just alarm, and you can go into and that's what initiates the so-called panic attack, when you have these symptoms that are exceptionally distressing. And so when you're distressed, and again, it could be over anything, but when you're distressed, it becomes critical at that moment. Let me reverse that. It becomes critical that you understand this principle before that happens. Before you get into some jam in life, some problem, or for you who have suffered chronically from anxiety and depression and mental health disorders, it is really critical that you are practicing before you have symptoms or in between symptoms. For the rest of you, it's important that you understand this now, so that when a symptom comes or a problem comes or stress comes and so forth, you're already prepared. No different than soldiering. You do your work in on a base, boot camp, then you're on a base and you're trained in various tactics of warfare before you go to war. You don't send a recruit in, recruit them, give them a uniform, a gun, and send them out. They don't know what to do. Well, it's the same thing with this type of a situation. Practice is best when you're asymptomatic. That means when you are not, when you're feeling good. Now here's the thing. It's kind of an old saying, but it has a lot of truth to it. And it goes this way. When you're sick, you think that you will never get well. And when you're well, you think that you'll never get sick. Very, very true of human nature. So when you're sick, you start to get very distressed, even more distressed. Panic cycle begins, anxiety, depression. And well, that's one thing, and we'll talk about those aspects of these disorders. But what I'm saying to you now is that when you are doing well, don't forget these principles, the principles of the Bible, because the tendency in all of us is to forget the past. Remember the words of the Mexican-born American philosopher George Santayana. He said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. All right, so you're doing well, but you forget that you had this issue going on. And another thing is that when you have a real ongoing condition with anxiety, depression, and so on, and the symptoms are alleviated. I used to always tell my students all the time, you're doing well now, that's great, but don't forget, these symptoms have a way of returning. I don't know by now if anybody's actually really sure exactly why they return. I think I have some ideas why they return, but that's not important now. The fact is they do. But if you're doing your homework in between symptoms, like for instance, you're watching right now, and you're doing okay. You just got curious about what's Pastor Ray doing, or who's this guy with the beard talking about anxiety, and it just piqued your interest. Well, especially if you've had any problems with anxiety in the past, those symptoms, to one degree or another, they will return. It could be years in between, don't get me wrong. It's not like it's going to happen once a week. It could be years, and that's even worse because once you think it's over, all of a sudden it came back. So there is an example of why it's necessary to constantly be concentrating on God and on His Word and on His promises and on the things that He has given to us as principles. Principles are laws, that's all. We could say the laws of God. We could say the principles, the word principle and law, the same thing. So these principles we find in the Bible are actually laws. And when we work with the laws of God in His book, written in His book, it's well. And when we don't, it's not well. Here's the law. We cannot forget the past. And I'm speaking to those of you who have had chronic problems with these disorders. For those of you who haven't, be on guard for anything in life that's going to surprise you, and the way you do that is by being obedient to God every day of your life. Always being prepared, right? To be forewarned is to be forearmed. You're ready for something that could, and certainly with nervous symptoms, it will occur, no question. It's just a matter of two things: when and how bad will it be, the intensity. And this one here, the second one, the intensity of it is largely dependent on how you handle it once it returns. Again, it could be years in between. It could be 10, 12 years. And all of a sudden, these symptoms out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere, return. So what's important now is that you were prepared for this. And so we keep the casualty list smaller rather than it blowing back up and becoming a huge problem again. You must never permit yourself to doubt the fact that God loves you. Here's the scripture that goes with it. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Casting all your care upon him, because he careth for you. Now I use a King James Bible, so obviously some of the words are archaic, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't use one, because it's a great interpretation of the Bible. In my opinion, the very best. That's why I use it. Careth, what does it mean? Well, the word care here, and when Jesus was talking about cares, is a Greek word merimna, and it means anxiety. When Jesus, for instance, said, "Take no thought for tomorrow," he wasn't talking about don't make a plan, don't have a plan, just go day by day. However, he was saying, take it one day at a time. So you have a plan for tomorrow, next week, next year, retirement, whatever it may be, your job, your school, your marriage, whatever. But you only live one day at a time. Merimna, or in our English Bible here, King James Bible, is the word care, means anxiety. You're worried about tomorrow. How will I eat? How will I be fed? In fact, especially during the times we're in right now, some predictions of the economy is that this is going to mimic or be like the Great Depression of 1929. I don't know. I can't say that it's not. I can't say that it is. That's not my expertise, but I can say this much. You don't have to be the one jumping out a window in despair. Really, once again, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I feel a urgency to come to you and to bring you these messages to help you. So if what we're facing in this country right now, in America, well, of course it's across the globe, but I'll confine my remarks to Americans. If what we're facing right now becomes, I mean, when we all get back, I'm in work, I haven't changed, I just don't know if I'm going to get paid. But I trust God that it will, but I'm still working anyway, so just without the usual things in place, but God's been good to me, so I'm not worried. And that's a good point, you know. Did I get there overnight? No. It took years of experience for me to learn this one thing. God will never let me down, even in the middle of distressing circumstances. Now, what I want you to have is the same experience. I've got experience. Some of you watching don't. In fact, I'd venture to say that the great majority of you watching don't have this kind of experience. So you look at the news, and you know, news journalism, they go by only one maxim: if it bleeds, it leads. So you're not going to read a headline saying, "Hey, we're getting close to world peace," and if you do, it's a fantasy. It's always going to be something dramatic. Even if you study psychology, so some of you have, they'll always bring in cases in the books, the textbooks, that are the most dramatic cases. But the truth of it is that the average person who suffers, their cases are never really all that dramatic. I mean, anxiety issues and panic attacks and severe depression, clinical depression, is very, very bad. However, there's a tendency to always deal with the worst possible case scenario. This is what the news does with us. So, you know, you're gonna have to make a choice. Are you gonna believe this scripture that I just read to you, which I'd like to explain it to you? Are you gonna believe that God cares for you, right? I mean, you right now, you as an individual, that God cares for you the same way he cares for me. For those of you, again, watching the music videos that I've been doing, I sang by request a song, His Eye is on the Sparrow. It comes from the teachings of Christ, that if his eye is on the sparrow, I know he's watching me. And that's easy to say, and it's even easier to sing. Yeah, it's a nice song, and it sounds pleasant. It's cheerful to sing it. Maybe I hope it was cheerful for you to hear it, I don't know. But when you're really in a problem, I mean, really in a bad, distressing situation, and you have, experts who do care about you and your situation, but they're shaking their heads. That was my story. If you listen to it, you watch it, they were just shaking their heads and saying, there's no hope, there's nothing else we can do. Well, that's even more frightening than the condition itself, that they're saying that there's no cure, there's no help, there's no way out. We're going to be presented with this even more and more in the world and in the times that we're living in right now. So it becomes critical that you accept by faith that God really loves you. And I said this last night, I want to repeat it. You have these, I'll be polite and call them superficial televangelists. Believe it or not, for some of us, not everybody, but for some of us, it's just easy to be in front of a camera. If you got a little bit of the talent and the gift, whatever, you talk to the camera the same way you would talk to a crowd. I've never suffered from a fear of, talking, public speaking, ever. Even before I was a preacher, I just never had that. And so I call them just superficial, but there's other stronger words I can use. I'll just let them out. I'll let it go for now. And, you are loved. But, I was never convinced that this man talking to me, even with a Bible in his hand, was really telling me the truth. But when I met Christ, I was convinced, especially once you get experience. So, for you, you must come to a place to accept by faith the statements of Scripture. I'm only giving you one today. The statements of Scripture that says that God actually cares for you. And then you say, I believe that, Lord. Now, let me talk about feelings. They'll play a big part in these studies, by the way. Emotions, of course. I share with you this fact. When I came to Christ, I had an easy time believing many of the things. Well, a lot of them I already knew. I mean, the basic doctrines of the Bible. Some of them I didn't know, and I read the Bible. But the one thing that I had a very difficult time understanding was God's love for me. And oddly enough, I had no problem understanding that he loves you, and he loves this person and that person. I just had a hard time understanding that he loved me. And then one day it came to me that I had accepted so many doctrines of the Bible simply by faith. I've never seen Jesus. I mean, I've never touched him. I've never been to heaven, as some of these extravagant claims are out there. They tell us about how they come. These are Christian ministers. I mean, I'm using that term loosely. They've been to heaven, they come back, they tell us stories, they go like every night. You know what? Don't believe it. Don't believe it. You're being conned. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not saying God can't do it. I'm not saying there are some cases where this has happened. I'm just saying that the guy that tells you he's always back and forth all the time is a con artist. That's not what you need to learn the truth. You don't need a con artist. You need someone who's telling you the truth. And I'm telling you the truth. Well, that's why I named my ministry The Time for Truth. The price of that doesn't matter much. I mean, the price that I've paid doesn't matter much, as long as I can finish my ministry and my course with faithfulness to the Word of God. So with that in mind, until you end the struggle the way I did, by just accepting the statements of God on his love for me by faith, without having to feel it, you're going to struggle. Because when you hit a problem and an anxiety attack comes, a panic attack comes, you fall into that depression that you had some years ago, whatever, you're going to struggle, because when you try to go to God and pray, even when you're in desperation, I mean, how your prayers are desperate because you're desperate, you're going to have a hard time coming to real faith, believing that, well, God's going to come through. And you know that. So you're kind of just being patient, and you're enduring the panic attack, the anxiety, the depression, which can be prolonged. Panic attacks can come, you could have multiple ones in a day. And believe me, I say this again, they're no fun for any of you that have had them. You know what I'm talking about. They are not fun. Not at all. But to be patient during that time is going to be predicated upon the fact that you know that you know that you know that you know God loves you. And you don't get that by trying to feel it. You get that by believing it. No matter how bad this situation is, God will come through. God will heal. God will touch. And God will provide. Job, who stands out in the Bible, in the Old Testament, as probably the greatest example of a righteous person suffering. He said during his suffering, I know that my Redeemer lives, that he shall stand upon the earth in the latter days, and though after worms consume my body, yet in my flesh I will see God. He also said that though the Lord slay me, yet will I trust in him. Well, these are great statements of faith, because he's not having a good time of it. Read the book of Job. He's being rejected by his wife, his friends, people that respected him. He's got sickness. He's lost all his children. He's lost his business. He's lost his health. Now his family or his wife is chiming in, calling him an ungodly individual, curse God and die. And his friends are saying, we know you've sinned, though they didn't know, because he didn't sin. It was a test. And he said, though the Lord slay me, yet will I trust in him. See, now he's not living by feelings, because nothing in his life was making him feel good. Now he's living by faith, and that's what you must do to conquer anxiety, fear, to conquer depression. Depression is not easy, but it can be done. And I'm hoping that in your case, it will be done. But it won't be done if you're trying to still live by the feeling of depression and the thoughts that go with it. When I went through my episodes years ago with depression, the acute ones that I had many years ago, it was just like Churchill described it, a black dog. It was like a big black cloud just sat over my head, and it was more than just feeling sad. It was an incredible depth of I never could find words to describe these situations. They just fall short of what they actually felt like and what I was sensing and feeling and all that. All I can say is that you feel truly hopeless. Now, what dragged me, what brought me out of all of that was a continual resistance by my will to not doubt the love of God. Well, the first part of my story, I didn't know God, I came to know him. But the second part of my story, the plot twist, is I did know him, and I refused to disbelieve that God would come through, and he always has. He always has. And he will for you too. But he won't, I shouldn't say he won't, but you're going to be suffering unnecessarily. Now, one thing to suffer, there's another thing to suffer unnecessarily. Either way, you must accept by faith that God actually cares for you. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit now about the first part of the verse. Let me read it again. Casting all your care. Again, we come across the word translated in our Bible into care, which means anxiety. So put anything you want in there, your anxiousness and fearfulness and so forth. All of these feelings, by the way, are natural in so many instances, and some others, as we'll talk about in these broadcasts, are imaginary. But we'll get into that. So you cast your care. Now, last night I was using this piece of paper here, these principles. This happens to be laminated by a man who listens to my broadcast on the radio in Florida, or at least he got some tapes. He lives in Florida, and just by reading this and some of the tapes that were sent to him, the CDs, he made tremendous progress. And when he came up here to meet me and we shook hands and sat here in my office for a little bit, he gave me this, he says, I got a bunch of them that are all laminated. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the means right now to send them to you should you want them. But I said you could download them from the internet, from our website, timefortruth.com. So those that come here can have them, copies of them. Any of my people who are listening, if you need a copy of this, want a copy that's a laminated copy, you can have it. But I use this as a prop. This is what we do as Christians, and this is what we do when we're talking to God. We give him our burden, right? Now this here, casting your care, the word casting is the Greek word balo, and it means to hurl it or to throw it. And when you hurl a stone across, let's say, a pond, it's not with the intention of going swimming to go pick it up again. I mean, you're getting rid of it. Well, that's what this word means. Casting all your care. So, you cast it away. Well, many of us do that in prayer, and then when we're done praying, we take it back. And we go on our way. And we wonder, why am I suffering? Why am I so anxious? Why am I so fearful? The reason is because after you gave it to God, you really didn't give it to God. You just told him what's on here. You just told him what's on the paper, and then took it back with you. Well, that's not casting your care. That's not what this verse means. This verse means, say, God, I know that you love me. That's the first important thing, right? I know that you love me. Now, I'm going to go and trust you because I know you love me and you got the power. I'm going to go and thank you and believe that you are going to come through for me. And if you're waiting a period of time, which is kind of the norm, when you're sick, you don't want to wait for anything. That's part of this life. God will come through, and you'll feel this freedom in your spirit and in your life. I get contacted daily from text messages, email messages, messages on Facebook Messenger, well, every day. Rarely a day will go by that I don't get something. Children with cancer, a woman whose son is in another state, facing 12 to 15 years in prison for possession with the intent to sell. Critical conditions. Here in the church, cancer pops up, and these are not good things. My job, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a medical doctor, though I am a doctor, I'm an academic doctor. My job is to give you the scriptures. And when you practice them, you have experience, but you say, wow, God came through. And the more you see God come through, the more you trust. That's how it works. There's not a day, hardly ever, that goes by that someone's not contacting me, usually for prayer. Sometimes they want advice. I usually tell them, write it out in the email and I'll answer it the best that I can. So it's what ministers do. It's what pastors do. And let me remind you, if you have a question, put it in the comments section. I'll do my best. If the comments start to get to be a lot, because I'm getting a lot of activity on these platforms, from radio, from television, and so forth, that it's a lot for me to try to keep up with, and I'll do my best. I will do my best. But let me get back to this. Casting your care upon him because he cares for you. If you believe he cares for you, okay, that's first. Then you take your anxieties and your depressions and your mental health disorder and the verdict that I had, you you feel to yourself that, this will never work out, but it's going to work out as you give it to God and as you believe that God will come through. Okay, I'll be here again tomorrow, and we'll continue this, casting your care upon Him, because He cares for you. Thanks for being with me. I appreciate your subscription and your hitting the notification bell on Pastor Ray Barnett on that YouTube channel, and also the Time for Truth Ministries. God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow. God bless. Bye.